It was midnight before Martha turned onto Cottonwood Road and lowered the window, hoping to hear the great gray owl who was the shaman of the wilderness, whose voice, she'd often thought, was the lament of all women who lay in bed alone, sisters of a certain silence. She let Goldie, her Australian shepherd, out for a quick tour of the property while she fed chopped-up elk venison to Sheba, her brittle-whiskered Siamese. She stood in the doorway and whistled to Goldie. She didn't like her to roam after dark, as there was a tom lion whose beat extended up and down the canyon. She whistled again and shut the door after Goldie bounded in. Goddamn degrees of separation. It was bad enough to pass the silhouette of the teepee on her drive home every night. But why couldn't a week go by without Stranahan's name crossing someone's lips other than her own? I won't hate him, she told herself. I won't hate him for the wall I built to keep him out of my life. I have only myself to blame for the night I turned out the light. For the light had been their understanding. On nights when she turned the porch light on, the signal that she was done with her workload she'd carried home from the office, he was free to drop by to have tea, iced or hot as the season dictated, while they sat before the varnished tree stump that served as her desk, and on which she always had a partially completed jigsaw puzzle. They would work the puzzle and talk about their days. Sean was a fishing guide, so his were spent on the river. But he also was a watercolorist, specializing in angling art, and a now-and-then private detective, which was how they'd met several years before. They'd stir the surface of life while the tension built underneath. At a certain point, it could be 10 minutes, it could be 30, Sean would carry his glass to the kitchen and come back. She'd hear the footsteps on the floorboards and shut her eyes. And he'd bend down behind her chair and wrap his arms around her, cupping her breasts while she let out a sigh. "Take off your gun," he'd whisper against the side of her neck, and she'd feel the tickling in the soft down of her hair. And she'd set down the puzzle piece in her fingers and stand up, lean back against him for a long minute, both of them feeling the other's arousal, and she'd take him by the hand to the bedroom. The first time they'd made love, she actually had been wearing her gun when he'd told her to take it off, and the puzzle on the stump had been elephants against the backdrop of Kilimanjaro. Since then, they had shared each other's desire after working other puzzles, the Spanish Steps, Machu Picchu, a box of gaudy steelhead flies called Dead Man's Fancy, and a pride of lions in the Okavango Delta. They'd made love on 4 continents without ever leaving the log walls of her 100-year-old farmhouse, or so she had liked to think of it. And then the day she didn't like to think about, when she had walked to the door to switch on the porch light and hadn't. She told herself it wasn't any one thing, although it had happened the same night she'd had a call from her youngest son, David, who was a sophomore at the University of Arizona in Tucson. David, who, like his older brother Derek, had chosen to live with his father after the divorce. David, who made her heart jump when he said he'd like to visit her this June, do some fishing and hang out with her before earning credits towards his geology degree by spending 6 weeks in the Montana Badlands on a dinosaur dig sponsored by the Museum of the Rockies. Martha hadn't even known he'd applied for the position, and the prospect both thrilled and terrified her. Immediately, she'd thought of Sean, what a good mentor he could be for her son, not only on the river. But how would David react? Her dating a man in his mid-30s when she had seen 40 flow under the bridge last October. Of course, that wasn't it at all. Not if she was really being honest. She was simply utterly terrified of being hurt when it ended. Because it was going to end, like every relationship in her life had ended. And how much it hurt was a function of how long it lasted.